Off you go.
Sure. Thanks, Marie.
Thank you. It's kind of weird. We don't know who's watching.
Is anyone watching?
It's probably better not to know. We'll assume there's a stadium. There's a stadium watching.
At least we're not like getting dressed right now. Yeah. So I think, let's see here. Yes, some people are coming in. We'll get started in 1 minute. Cool. I see my friend Kim has logged in.
Hi, Kim.
She can't hear us yet, but this is
okay. Well, maybe she'll hear it in the recording later.
So, hi everyone. Hi Facebook friends. This is Christine Gold, founder and CEO of Thought for Food. I am so excited tonight for another edition of Christine and Guests. This is our format where I'm inviting very interesting and exciting people from my personal and professional network to come join us and talk about the amazing things that they're doing in the world. And it's absolutely my delight to introduce Gemma Milne. I'm super hyped for this section. She is the author of a book called Smoke and Mirrors, which recently came out. And there's a whole story about that too, about launching during, a pandemic, right? Oh, hey, there it is. But she has a very illustrious bio, actually, that, she's a journalist for all of the big name publications that you follow if you're in startups, Forbes, Quartz, Mashable.
Not Mashable,
but
Mashable. Other ones. PC and things like that.
She is a World Economic Forum global shaper. I got to know Gemma through an organization called Sandbox. I would definitely say that you have like one of those, dot connecting type backgrounds. And that has also been something that I think has really allowed you to do a lot of really interesting things throughout your life. So Gemma, I actually want to hand over to you to introduce yourself and talk a little bit about, what made you write Hype and what's it all about?
Sure. Hello. Thank you for the invitation. Oh gosh, where to start? I don't know how to live up to the intro you've already given me. I am a writer, a podcaster, a person that just kind of, as you say, likes doing a whole load of different random things and getting involved with lots of different really intriguing and interesting organizations and people around the world. I predominantly am interested in what a lot of people call deep tech, so things like biotechnology, quantum computing, AI, space technologies, anything that's kind of coming out of science labs and into the real world. But I also think a lot about the role that I guess science and technology plays in more broader parts of society, not just kind of what science can do, but what society does to do with science, and also how we talk about science and technology. So obviously Smoke and Mirrors is a book about hype and the role that hype plays. So obviously it's very much about how we talk about science and tech. And, we all know the phrase, the pen is mightier than the sword. So we know that words matter. That's not anything new, but I wanted to talk a little bit about what does it mean to, I guess, hype responsibly in a way that makes yourself heard, particularly when you're doing really important things in the world and things that people need to hear about and want to hear about. But you also do it in a way that doesn't result in things like opportunity cost for other people, sending, money down the wrong paths, problematic, government decisions, and other things that I've kind of outlined in the book. And just to give you a little bit of context as well, originally I wanted to write the book. It kind of came from a place of frustration. Of being like, hype, it's so frustrating and annoying and people don't get this, and not just are they getting the wrong idea, but they're not getting to see how amazing all this stuff is. And I've had various different jobs, being a writer's more recent job. Before I was in corporate innovation, so working with startups. Before that I was in advertising. Before that I was in investment banking. Before that I did door-to-door sales at one point. Hype has played a really weird and wonderful role across many of my jobs, but that's kind of made me realize how problematic it can be. And so I really wanted to write this book as a kind of this is why hype is bad and we need to, bust it or whatever.
Yeah.
But the more that I researched, I realized that actually there's a lot more to it. And I kind of landed more on the fact that hype is a tool, and I try to use smoke and mirrors to explain myself and show how everyone can think about it a little bit more deeply.
Yeah, I mean, I was really interested to read also like about your career journey and how that influenced how you're thinking about hype. Because like you said, at certain parts of your career, you were actually like the hype machine, like you were creating hype.
Precisely.
And and actually seeing how in many companies actually like innovation wasn't an R&D like strategic initiative. It was like something that gave them a marketing edge and, the ability. And so was that like the moment where you were like, wait a second, hype can...
I think it was certainly, I don't know if it was necessarily that there was like a one moment that made me switch. I think it was probably a gradual thing over a long period of time. But yeah, I was in an innovation team at an advertising company. And so my job was to not only, find interesting companies that the advertising company could make the most of, so like ad tech companies. I also had to find technologies and interesting people that all of the clients of the advertising company would find interesting. And I worked for Ogilvy, which does all industries. So it was basically just go find interesting startups in any industry and connect them with the clients. Yeah. But the third thing that I had to do was essentially showcase Ogilvy as innovative. And, there was fun parts of that role that it, meant I traveled the world a lot and did a lot of speaking and, talking on behalf of the company, meeting people on behalf of the company and whatnot. But after some time, it did feel like I'm talking about all these ideas and new innovations and whatnot, and then I'm going back into my job and banging my head off a brick wall because I can't get anyone to talk to any of these startups. I'm struggling so hard. Every now and again you'd get one collaboration would go through and you'd be like, thank God this project's getting off the ground. But most of the time you were saying, hi, we should probably think about doing this, and why don't we do that, and blah blah blah. And then the reply you get was like, oh, could you make sure you write an article about us for the advertising press to make us look innovative? And so it wasn't just from the company perspective, but also for the clients. You'd have someone come to Ogilvy going, your job is to advertise our company, and the brief is to make us look innovative. So can you get your innovation team to do something innovative? And then we are showcasing our innovation capability. And I used to get those briefs and I was like, why don't you just do something and then talk about it after, as opposed to... So, it obviously wasn't always like that, but I think that's where I started, shall we say, developing my skeptical muscle around the role that innovation as a buzzword plays.
Yeah, and I definitely feel like the moment in time for your book is now, because we've seen the backlash from the hype machine. There's been like the Theranos scandal. There's been the Silicon Valley TV show, which I still crack up when they're having their like signature line where they're at TechCrunch Disrupt, and everyone's like making the world a better place through Paxos algorithms for consensus protocols or whatever. Like, but whatever like weird app that they've developed. And I think that, look, we're doing that in Thought for Food is like, saving the world with whatever innovation it is. So then your book comes along, right? To kind of say like, okay, we're starting to get a little buzzwordy here, people. And like, yeah, can we tone this down a bit? So what do you think, like, what's a great example of hype that like stands out to you right now?
In a good way, or in a
no,
just
like
in general?
In a bad way, in a way
okay.
Oh yeah, this is
okay. Well, I'll give you one example, which I think is around sort of the power of words, and I'll give you the example, but I'll also tell you why I think it's problematic. So you've all heard the phrase robots are going to steal your jobs, right? That's standard headline. I would be very surprised if anyone watching this has not heard that somewhere or read it somewhere. And it's a compelling headline. It's not a lie. And this is key because hype is different from lying. Hype is exaggeration of an element of truth, right? So there's an element of truth in robots are going to steal jobs because we're talking about automation. That's really what that headline is about. It's about automation is happening right now and it's coming and we should think about it. That's basically what it's actually saying. But robots are going to steal jobs brings up in your head these images of Terminator. It brings up images of immigrants. It's the same narrative that's used around immigrants coming to countries. They're stealing our jobs. It brings up, possibly, if you're being a bit more philosophical, questions about, if the robot's doing the job, what does creativity really mean? And these kind of bigger, whatever. And, that's important questions, but they're very distant. They're very far away. They feel very far future. If you reframe the headline, robots going to steal your job, remembering it's about automation, and talk about automation in a different way. And you say, corporate executives are making active decisions to replace human labor with automated machinery in the name of profit. You're saying the exact same thing. Automation is happening. You need to think about it, but you're using different words. And that second headline makes it very present. It makes it very, very clear who decision makers are and where responsibility lies. And it brings up completely different questions to those who receive it. Like, what do we think about corporate power? Should they reskill if they're the ones replacing? What does tax look like? What does universal basic income look like? Things that, frankly, in my opinion, are questions that need to be answered now. And we need to essentially empower those that are reading these headlines with the ability to feel like, actually, this is something that I can take part in, as opposed to it being this faraway sci-fi-esque philosophical thing. So
yeah, like a super interesting point, because I think like there's two people who are like, or maybe three actually, like groups in the world of startups that are like part of the hype machine. One that you're hitting kind of the example around is around the media, right? And like how they are presenting technology, and the impact in the world. So there's a responsibility, I'm hearing you say, that like media has to like maybe frame these topics in a more thoughtful way. And then there's, or not.
Well, I mean, I've heard startups say that on stage.
Well, that's what I was going to say. Second stakeholder group is like startups and how they're positioning their technology to save the world. Like, so I just love the show Silicon Valley. I don't know if anyone in the audience has watched it, but it's like, it doesn't even feel like a comedy. It feels like a reality show.
Yeah, it's like satire, but sometimes you watch it and you're like, I've literally seen someone say that. That's not a joke. Like, it's not the hashtag, not the onion,
Absolutely. And so then there's the startup side of it. And then there's like the investor side too, where there's like this kind of like ecosystem of like, we're going to fuel the hype machine, And
but just to quickly clarify then, so what I'm saying about robots are going to steal a job, yes, okay, a lot of people read that in the media, but it's repeated. So hype is not necessarily about who has said it. It's about the fact that it spreads. It's about the fact that it latches on to something in your brain, and you say it over and over again, and you kind of believe it, and you use it flippantly, but you also say it seriously. And so robots are going to steal their job is a thing that it's like everyone agrees on or something, and doesn't think about, well, actually, is me saying that problematic? And you can find problematic examples from investors, startups, and media, all with different repercussions just from that one piece of hyped up narrative.
But there's a positive side to hype too. And I think that was very elegant that you covered it in the book. And I think like TFF, if I'm really honest, maybe falls into that positive side, which is like hyping a cause and to create a movement, right?
Yes.
So can you talk a little bit about like maybe the positive side of hype?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, this is, I guess, my whole thing about hype as a tool. In the same way that advertising is a tool. You can think that advertising companies are bad, which a lot of them are, but we also need advertising, and advertising can play a positive role when it's done responsibly. And it's the same. I mean, hype is very closely linked with advertising. So yeah, hype is a tool for simplification, for cutting through, from being heard. Getting your message out there in a way that actually resonates and people stop scrolling. Of course, that's important. I mean, God, even public service information like stay at home, for instance, needed hype in order for people to hear it and see it and do it, and it's the same for companies, for scientists, for whoever that's out there doing things that genuinely is, trying to make the world a better place. And I hear you about what you're saying about Thought for Food. You've got a mission, you want to get people to join the movement, you want stuff to change, and you have to cut through social media feeds and the fact that no one has any time and all that sort of thing. So hype has, when it's used as a tool for things that are good, whatever we agree that means, it's great. And I think that's kind of my point, what I was about to say about what we agree is good. Hype is a tool, so it's not necessarily bad. It's more around what is it being used for, exactly, what's the intent, and the individuals that are architecting hype, which we all do. When we tweet something, we're architecting hype if we want people to retweet it, right? So when you're architecting hype, it's like, what is the reason you're doing it? And you know, you have to be open to the fact that it might not be seen as good in other people's eyes. And, you know, we need to all be better at understanding how hype works, so that when we see it being utilized, we can make a decision for ourselves instead of being caught up in it and not understanding, looking at the context. We can look at the context and then go, do I think it was right that they used that hype? Yes or no? And
well,
that's what it's all about.
Totally. And I think you're like highlighting something that we think a lot about in TFF, which is like 21st century leadership skills, right? Because we're trying to like empower a new generation of business leaders, right? Millennials and Gen Zs are stepping into being in leadership roles, starting companies. And so how do we actually equip them with the skills that they need to garner investments? And I want to ask a specific question about like cultural differences around hype. And then also to, like basically have that critical thinking element.
Yeah.
Right? So that like you're able as a consumer, as an investor, as a human being to like see through the noise. Because social media is like a great tool. Like I have a love-hate relationship with social media, to be really honest with you, but I can't get off it because it's so much of how we connect with our global community.
Well, it's also a tool. It's also a tool, and it's how you use it. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
But like, how do you empower people with the critical thinking that they need to like get past the like hashtag and the like, you know, whatever short tweet, etc., to get to like the essence of this? And then like, I want to transition to like some practical tips that you can give like entrepreneurs. But before we go there, what do you think about this point about the cultural element of hype? Because I mean, I think Americans, like
you guys are more hypey. Yeah, you guys are more hypey for sure. Cultural element's definitely true. I mean, of course, my book's written from a very Western perspective. I'm Scottish, but I live in London, and you know, I've grown up in the UK. You know, I haven't lived anywhere else. I've traveled, but I've not lived anywhere else. So of course, I'm going to be writing it from that perspective predominantly, because that's what I'm exposed to mostly, as well as kind of the more, as you say, Silicon Valley-esque American stuff. Because again, if you're working in tech, that's what you tend to be most exposed to. I think my answer to how people critically think might help answer the cultural point. And because my answer to how people better critically think and empower themselves is I guess the end point is it's all about finding context. That's really what it's about. It's about finding nuance and finding context. And so if you understand that there must be context in something that's coming out, and not just assuming that it's good or bad, but having this sort of questioning attitude, then trying to work out the culture in which it's said, who it said, what role they have, what method have they used, what words have they used, when did they say it, what's happening in the world while they say it, is all really relevant in terms of how you interpret the message. And that sounds like I'm saying every time someone tweets something, you've got to go on this big fact-finding mission to understand. But it's not really about that. I mean, this is quite a simple thing. Really, all you have to do is pause for a second before you retweet or believe whatever's being said. It's pausing and going, okay, who said this? Let's hover over their little profile to see who they are. What's the, you know, what publication is it in, or is it just a tweet or whatever? Let me just click through onto their website or onto something else that they've tweeted recently. Or I'm talking about Twitter here, obviously, but you know, this is the same if a headline or if you're seeing someone speak on stage or whatever, right? It's not difficult to just very quickly ask a few questions and allow yourself to not get caught up. And so culture is a part of that, but so is things like, you know, say they use a narrative that's quite fearful. It's go, okay, that makes me feel fearful. That's okay. But let's put the fear to aside for 1 second and then analyze. Don't only get caught up in the fear and then make assumptions. So it's just, it's that pausing that's really, really
and like
important.
sticking with the Western world example, because I think, you know, let's like own that. Let's recognize that, you know, I've had a lot of experience with Thought for Food, working with startups all over the world. But in my like, you know, getting into the startup, right? I worked at high growth startups in Europe and the United States. And I definitely see a big difference when it comes to like how startups are trained to like pitch and talk about their products in the world. And so, you know, I do think that there's some element like in the US where there's this, going back to your door-to-door salesman experience that you had, there's this element of like, people want to like be sold on the dream, like what's possible. Picture for me. in Europe, you know, this is a continent where there's the precautionary principle. People want empirical data, you know, science-based. Well, it's not necessarily science-based, but they want like
there's risk averse. They're more risk averse. Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah.
So they're a little bit skeptical of this kind of like coming on too strong type thing. And it's funny because having worked in startups in both of these places, I really like feel like there's a sweet spot in the middle because sometimes I say to these startups in Europe, I'm like, you gotta like get the dream out there, you know, because otherwise, if you're just going to wait for every proof point to be 100% proven, you're never going to move forward, you know? And so, yeah, it's just like, it's one of those things that it's like, where is that sweet spot?
Yeah. I think the way I think about it is to do with like short term and long term. So, and what I mean by that is Smoke and Mirrors is written with the viewpoint of long-term change, right? So the point of the book is to say, let's empower everyone to be able to critically think. And when everyone does that, there'll be less hype because we'll all be more critical, we'll all be more questioning. And so therefore hype won't really work as potently anymore, right? Yeah. People will want nuance and they'll, you know, so, but that's a long-term thing, right? We don't live in that world.
Skill. That's what we need to be training in our education.
Sure. But what I'm saying is, so that's long term, and we want to. I think we should all be pushing for that. However, if you have a startup right now and you need money right now, you need a way of playing the game responsibly, right? And that's kind of where my tip for entrepreneur comes. There's two parts of this. Because I think a lot of people say to me, it's not possible to responsibly hype because we have to play the game. And I say, no, there is two things. First of all, there's a difference between vision and reality. Sell the vision, please do, but make it very, very clear that this is a vision. Right. This is what you're hoping to do. Yeah. It's not what you currently do. It's not next year. It's not even 5 years' time. This is long term, but that's what you're doing and you believe you can do it. There's nothing wrong with saying that, but you must differentiate. And if someone writes an article about you, shares something, whatever, and says this is what they're doing, you have the courage to say, that's not true. This is what we're trying to do. That's what we want to do. Have the courage. It's not, you know, people will respect you so much more. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, and I think this is actually where the food industry and food startups have a little bit of a one-up, because it's, so my thing is, you should, instead of talking about problem solution, talk about a system. And the reason I say this is because, as we all know, if you create a solution to a problem, more often than not deliberately, you will create a problem somewhere else down the line, because we live in an interconnected world. That's not necessarily wrong, because you can't solve everything. However, you must be aware of where you sit in an ecosystem, and you cannot sell yourself in a way that you have this narrow kind of, this is a problem, nobody solved it yet, we've got a solution, we're going to solve it, give us your money. It's not enough to say that, because not only are you mismanaging expectations and you're not being fully representative of the world in which you inhabit, but later on down the line, you know, it's that whole thing of like, write the Black Mirror episode for your company. Imagine your company has success. What might the repercussions be? If you don't think about that, that's when, you know, this whole thing of like, oh, we didn't realize that it might do that. It's like, well, it's not difficult to think about it at inception. You know, so those are my two tips, I guess, for entrepreneurs in terms of responsibility.
So number one tip is like, if the media misportrays you, startup founder, go correct them.
Yeah, tell them. Or tweet it yourself and say, hey, I'm so happy to get covered in Fortune. This is a dream. Just to clarify, you know, this is a vision that we're really proud of, and we're really excited to work towards this over the next 10 years. Not difficult. And people respect you so much more. And also, you got to remember that, see, when people see these hyped up headlines, a lot of people are skeptical. And so if you don't correct it, they then see you as a hype machine. And I've struggled to have respect for entrepreneurs that don't call this out and don't, you know, it's not about being careful with your words. It's just about making that distinction that we all know that you can't do lab grown meat right now. Like, obviously, because if we could, it'd be in Tesco and I could go buy it. Like, obviously. So, but, you know, and I do think it's important though to make that clarification, because even though it's obvious, it's also not obvious for people that are not in the industry. And that's when this is what I always talk about, this idea of like, when you take something out of context, that's when hype thrives. And that can mean, you know, you can say something to a VC and say, yeah, we're doing this. And the VC knows, like, yeah, okay, you're not doing it right now. You're doing it in 5 years, but I get what you're trying to say. That's fine. But all you need is one journalist in the room who's hearing that pitch going, this company's making this claim, but they're not doing it. They're a bad company. And that's also, that journalist is also being hypey too. But the point is that the minute you're taken out of context, that's when things spread. People don't understand.
Absolutely. I want to like talk about a couple of examples there, but the second piece of advice, just to remind everyone, write the Black Mirror episode. How fun is that?
Yeah, I actually nicked that from a VC, Atomico, here in London. I was on a panel with them.
Yeah.
And they said that they actually do that with all their portfolio companies after they've invested, but at least they still do it. And yeah, they take an afternoon and they make them sit and write a script.
I think you should do both. I think you should write the Star Trek positive episode. And then
but startups are kind of already doing that anyway. You don't, that's what that is the vision, right? That's the point, you know? And it's not about saying our company is going to make the world a terrible place. It's just being cognizant, for a second.
I want to push back a little bit because I think you're right. There are some startups that are doing that are on the hype machine, but a lot of times when I've been working with deep science based startups, they're actually not. They're really
that's
talking about the technical aspects of their product.
That is true.
And so then they hire in consultants or former investors who come in and help them create this, or the communications team, by the way, which I've heard of, who come in and they're like, okay, let's create the excitement in the world. And that's where, I think
that's true. I think, I mean, this is always what I say as well to deep tech startups. It's, if anything, they don't hype themselves enough, and that is a problem.
You just feel okay, I can take 500 pictures in 3 minutes and and I have this level sensor.
Yeah. It's I think it's in some sense it's actually it's harder with deep tech in some sense, because you do have many different stages that it's a sort of real journey to tell the story in deep tech it is, and I can be guilty of speaking to a deep tech startup and be like, for God's sake, it's not that difficult, come on, this is what you're doing, that's amazing. And they're like, well, it's quite hard to tell a story. I'm like, no, it's not. But then I remember I'm a professional writer, so it's I kind of have to be cognizant of that. But at the same time, I do think that that's where the system story comes in. And I think there's not enough trust in system stories. System stories are bloody fascinating. Talking about the system.
Because everyone's talking systems right now, right? I think it's amazing, and it's exactly the right thing that we should be doing. I'm actually currently involved in some of this work with the UN Food Systems Summit. And I really want to bring and highlight, systems thinking as the way we need to be talking about food and agriculture and solutions. So tell me more about systems and what you think the opportunity is here and how to position companies.
Well, I mean, let's look at the current situation we're in with coronavirus, right? The thing about systems, one of the big pushbacks that I've had in the past when I've been saying we should tell system stories, and not just me, everyone who is a big advocate for talking about systems, people say, oh, folk are not really interested in being taken on this big journey. It's really, if you start talking about supply chain and they don't know anything about supply chain, that's going to be too difficult for them to understand. It's too many steps, all this sort of thing.
Yeah.
In comes coronavirus and you can't get any toilet roll, and instantly you have to understand the system in order to understand your current reality. And the point is that what's happened right now is the intricacy and interconnectedness of systems has become personally affecting to so many people on the planet. And it's, there's a part of me that kind of thinks we've had it a little bit easy, not knowing how things actually work, and I think that in my mind, to give you a little bit of let go a slight detour for a second. I studied pure maths at university, right? So I am obsessed with trying to get to the root of things. Yeah. And my version of trying to understand the world was go to the most pure version of the world that we live in, which is numbers and axioms that all of science and then society is built on top of, right? Exactly, yeah. And I got to, I studied pure maths at university, and I got to my final year of university and I was like, I don't know anything about the world. This is not useful in the slightest. This is amazing. It makes me happy. It's very fascinating, but I don't understand why that guy just dumped me. And I don't understand why that politician is
there
in
an
power.
Equation that can explain this?
No, there's not, Christine. I found this the hard way, right? And so the point I'm making is I then had to kind of basically work out, okay, well, how do I actually be more comfortable with complexity and be more comfortable with systems and realize that actually this impacts that and that impacts that. And it's not really as simple as saying, well, that's the reason why. It's actually all of them together. And the more I kind of think about, when you find a problem in the world, the more you think about it, the more you realize that there's not a simple answer. It's normally an interconnected thing, and you normally have to balance some things going wrong in order for other things to go right. And I think that in and of itself, if you can tell those stories, it is fascinating, because you're like, God, in order to like do food well, sometimes you have to kind of damage the environment, but then it's also good to feed people and be nice, but then those people don't get paid, but they shouldn't get paid because they're actually damaging the environment, but then they don't have any money. And you've got this constant like, and that done well is interesting, because people like to think, people like watching documentaries, people like pondering generally. And I think that it's quite patronizing to not tell system stories because they're too complex. It's like, no, we should let people in to this whirlwind of understanding and let them build their own kind of map of it. And
I mean, I'm living for this. How do you go to an investor with that though? What does the new pitch deck look like? Can we create a template for this?
God, I know. I mean, I hear you. I do hear you.
Like the 3-step plan to change the world.
Right.
You know? Like,
I know. I hear you. I hear you. It is hard. It is hard. But at the same time, it's like, you know, even doing something like, this is a problem in the world. You think this is a solution. Let me explain to you why not. Let me take you on a little adventure of the food industry and do like 2 minutes. Like just that. Right. Like, and it's even saying something like, you know, I read this quote by Michael Lewis, who's written a whole load of books. He's doing a podcast with Malcolm Gladwell, all this brilliant guy.
Did he do the baseball book? Like
yeah. He's done tons of like amazing, you know, books that kind of really go in detail. And he said this thing which really stuck with me. He said, writers write because they feel the world has fundamentally misunderstood something. And that is so true. That's exactly why I feel the need to speak and to write, because I'm like, that's not, you think it's that, but it's actually this. And that's compelling as a story. And you can say, you think it's simple, but actually it's not. Let me tell you how the system works.
Right.
You know, I've tried to do it in Smoke and Mirrors. I appreciate I've got like 10,000 words per chapter. That's a lot of time to be able to explain a system. I get that. But there are ways of doing it in shorter amount of times. Look at YouTube. There's tons of examples on there, 3-minute videos that explain the whole food system, you know. It's just getting creative.
Yeah. Well, and so let's talk about something too that's been on my mind about hype, because okay, going back to what I said earlier, I'm American. I've been living in Europe for over 20 years, but like you can take the American out of America, but you can't take the American out of the American, you know, that whole stuff.
Yeah. I know you, Christine. It's all good. I know you.
But like, okay, so someone in the Q&A, Kim, actually my friend, hi Kim, said, don't forget to mention WeWork. And so I have to tell you, I have been like following WeWork and Theranos like crazy. I read the podcast, I listen to the podcast, I read the books, watched this whole thing. And like, I just wanted so badly the WeWork story to be true. And I think there's a lot of people that like want the hype to be real. They want the solution that's going to feed 10 billion people by 2050. They want the like, you know, culture that WeWork like was visioning for the world, etc. So I just was wondering like and you know, Theranos too, I think case in point, it's like, we wanted that. And there's like, we're also, you know, even if we have critical thinking skills, which I think I do, it's like, it's so interesting to believe this and to think like, this is what's possible. And I still believe one day Theranos will come true one day, you know?
Yeah, a different company, I would hope.
Totally. But like,
being able to do a blood test. Yeah, of course. I mean, we hope.
For something, you know what I mean? But it was like,
and there are other companies working as a Finnish company that I wrote about 2 years ago that's doing something very similar. So there are companies out there doing amazing things.
So it's like the psychological aspect of this I find really, really interesting. So I wonder if you could touch a little bit on that.
Of course. I mean, this is part of the reason why hype is so powerful, because we do want it to be true. I mean, that's one of the big arguments that I make in the book, is that we okay, so I'm gonna let me say this with let me be a little bit negative for a second, right?
Please.
I believe that I think that us wanting hype to be true is part of the reason why the things don't come true. Let me explain. So I think that if we say things like, oh, that company over there is going to do this thing, it basically makes us sit back and go, phew, there's someone out there solving that problem. I can just sit here, watch my Netflix, have my dinner, not worry about anything. Don't need to make sure someone signs a petition or votes or changes this X, Y, Z, or eats differently, or whatever it is that I can do in my own personal life, because don't worry, tech will save us. Someone over there is solving it. And what that hype can do is it takes away your power and your understanding of what it means as an individual to change. Now, there's lots of discussion around what can we do as individuals to really change the world. And, you look at the veganism movement, for instance, right?
Yeah.
There are things that we can all do to make things different. However, at the same time, one individual cannot change the world. That's true in a lot of ways. There's obviously exceptions, but most of the time, you having one less steak is not going to feed everyone by 2050. However, there are other things that we can get involved with that this sort of tech will save us narratives push us away from doing. Things like understanding the power of, consumer demand, or understanding what politicians are putting forward, what bills, and voting on them accordingly. And, can you even daft things, look at what's happening today now with the whole Black Lives Matter movement. I didn't know in the UK that we export rubber bullets to the US. I found that out on Instagram the other day, and I wrote to my MP, and so did many other people. And now Labour is standing up and doing a big investigation and pushing the Conservative government to put a freeze on companies exporting rubber bullets to the US. Now, if that little bit of information hadn't been put out in the world, pressure would not have been put on MPs, and that wouldn't have happened. So it sounds a bit trite, but there is power in people, and there's power in people understanding the reality of stuff, as opposed to being caught up in this pipe dream that someone else is sorting it, that this amazing entrepreneur over here in another part of the world is doing this thing. Exactly. So, we should get behind those that are trying and are building companies and are building movements and are whatever. Yes, of course, we should trust them and we should believe in them and all that. But at the same time, we cannot let that stop us ourselves from taking our own responsibility just because we believe that it's being done by someone else. It's all of our responsibilities to make the world a better place. Let's be honest.
You're nailing that message of nuance. It's not, either or. It's not somebody saving the world and, I don't need to act. It's actually we all have a role. As entrepreneurs, we're doing our part to develop solutions, et cetera, that can lead us in a positive direction. But also as individuals, to your point, it's
we can only do what we can do. And it's hard. I mean, God, I think a lot of white people have been realizing this over the last 10 days. There's a limit as to how much guilt and complicity and shit feelings that you can carry with yourself every day, but that doesn't mean that you shouldn't do it. And I think that a lot of the times hype acts as this easy answer. I mean, look at the food industry. There's so many things as individuals that we can do to make our food systems better. There really is. We know that. And if we are being told that there's a Silicon Valley company out there that's solving the future of food and we don't need to worry about it, it kind of reduces the power that individuals can feel to actually do something themselves.
I agree more. And I think one of the things too, we're trying to combat it very actively in TFF is to combat that Silicon Valley tech saves the world, because especially in food and ag, we're very much about solutions from the ground up in the places that they're locally relevant, right? And how do we foster the solutions that are meaningful in 175 countries where we work? And I think this is also really, really important. Investors don't get it. They want the tech saves the world. And sometimes the most simple of solutions actually can be completely transformational.
Yeah. And not make very much money for the investors, but...
Well, exactly. But I think that's really interesting too, because there's a chance to rethink some business models.
Absolutely. Oh God, VC, don't even get me started on VC. This is another, and we could do a whole other section on that. That's separate. But no, you're right. And I think that's also part of the nuance. It's we also need to get away from this idea that it's startups that are going to save the world. There's other people trying to save the world too. There's activists, there's politicians, there's, people that work in healthcare, there's bin men, there's people out there that, I'm not trying to be trite, I'm not trying to be overly whatever, but I think this hero narrative of entrepreneurs as being the people that are, making these massive sacrifices and whatnot. It's they are, but so are other people, and they don't get the same sort of narrative said about them. And my biggest problem though is more with the hero narrative of VC. They are financiers. They are not heroes. They give money. I mean, even the word angel investor,
I know,
angel.
angel.
It's so inappropriate. And it's like, you know, you can, there's lots of lovely, well-meaning VCs that want to help the world, but at the end of the day, their role is as financiers.
They're making money.
Right. And not, there's
Yeah.
not necessarily tons wrong with that, although there is, you can argue that there isn't very easily, but that is their role. And we need to get away from this kind of cult of entrepreneurship, hero narrative VC.
And I think also groupthink. I mean,
Yes.
that's something I experience every day, is like the kind of like trends in food, you know, it's like, is this like actually a trend, or have we made it a trend?
Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, it's self-fulfilling prophecy of hype.
Exactly.
Self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yeah.
Look at VR. I'm pretty sure VR is a technology that's been a self-fulfilling prophecy, if I'm honest. Like I think healthcare, I think VR in healthcare, arguably in education, maybe, but you know, the fact that it's used as like in supermarkets as like a retail buying experience, like, are you kidding me? No.
Well, I definitely, from my personal side, have to say, like, I have too many apps on my phone that I never use, you know? And so I think like having another layer of like VR apps. I mean, where I think VR is kind of fun, I guess it's more augmented reality, but
yeah.
I mean, I do love me a Snapchat filter.
Well, but see, this is the thing, right? This is the one thing I just really quickly want to say that we didn't quite get time to touch on yet is the difference between need and want. Right. And this is actually another big question you can ask yourself when you're pausing to look at a headline and whatnot. Specifically if you're excited by it, it's like, do you want this or do you need this? And I think this is a question we don't ask ourselves in the tech sector often enough. And there's nothing wrong with wanting something, but we need to know when it's a want versus a need. We must understand the difference, and we must fund things accordingly. This recent Clubhouse funding, $10 million for a social media app.
Viewers, in case anyone doesn't know about it, because I retweeted you on that because that was shocking.
Yeah, it really upset me actually. It's the future of Zoom, but it's like you speak using your voice, and you can like be in rooms and people can talk to each other. It's just like it's a social media app that uses real-time voice, and you can get in groups and have a conversation.
And celebrities are on the bandwagon, I think.
Well, see, this is the problem with it. They built it and they did their beta release invite only, as many software companies do, which is not a problem. And they invited all the like Silicon Valley folks, so like entrepreneurs, VCs, and then they cajoled some celebrities and celebrity VCs, right? Like the people in tech that people look up to, whatever, onto this app. And then what it's become is this like VIP social media platform. And you know, when it was kind of first covered, I thought, okay, whatever, let the VCs have their silly voice memo app, whatever, like what's the big deal? I think it's stupid, but whatever. And then the battle of the VCs to invest in this company. Andreessen Horowitz, yeah, $10 million cash and $2 million in secondary shares for this company, and you know, saying it's the future of social media. And I'm like, hold on a second, it's an app at the moment for VCs to talk to each other. The minute you open it up, they're not going to use it anymore. So like, what's the actual value here? Is it the technology? Is it the people in it? Is it, you know? And I'm sure they've got answers to all this. But what my real issue was this happened only about a month ago, the middle of the coronavirus pandemic.
Yes.
And it's like, do we need another social media app, or do we want another social media app? The answer is I don't, but they want.
Yeah.
Fine to want, but not that amount of money.
Yeah, because Mark Andreessen had just published that blog about
building. I know.
Yeah, we need to build. It's about building a better world. And then it's like, okay, you've literally just funded Zoom 2.0 for like rich people.
And it's like, you know, if people want to spend their money like that, you know, the argument is, well, be my guest. People can spend their money like that however they want, but they don't get to say that there's change in the world. In the same way that a billionaire buys a yacht, they cannot say, I'm changing the world because I've bought a yacht. No, you've bought a toy. And it's the same with this.
That, but don't put that's where I love where Silicon Valley mocked that, where everybody now is like, I'm changing the world. No,
yeah, it's the same thing. And the final point I also want to say is that, you know, I personally don't really want to live in a world where people, without any input from anyone else, gets to just give $10 million to two men, two white men, building an app.
Mhm.
I just don't want to live in a world. I don't know. It feels icky to me. It feels wrong. And I don't know. There's so many other causes. And also, final point, and Andreessen Horowitz has just launched a new thing for Black founders, and it's to help, and that's great. That's awesome. They've put $2.2 million into that, 10 million into the app.
Who's calling them out on this?
Well, that's a whole other discussion as well. That's a whole other discussion. I'll pause on that. You can,
Wow. Either into the Q&A box. Looks like we got one in right now. Or the chat. Yes. Javier.
I filled up my wine, so I'm ready.
Oh, you have to meet him, by the way. This is one of our famous finalist teams right now in the cohort.
Oh, cool. Nice.
Get to pitches. So Javier from Jalinet in Mexico, we produce a natural sweetener, xylitol, from actual crop waste. It's a very, very interesting startup that he has. If we only have one product and we constantly make posts on social media about its benefits, how can we check that we're not exaggerating? At the beginning, we had a problem in which people thought our product was a medicine for diabetics.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's problematic. You want to make sure people get the right idea about what you're doing, for crying out loud.
Yeah.
I mean, okay.
I love me some Gemma.
Sorry, I'm very blunt. It's the Scot in me. Well, not the Scot in me. I am Scottish, and we are a blunt nation. Okay. This is a totally fair question, Javier. Thank you for that. And xylitol, really interesting. If you have one product and constantly post about social media-based benefits, how can we check we're not exaggerating? I mean, I don't want to sound like I'm being a bit. I don't know how I'm sounding. I think it's quite obvious when you know you're exaggerating. Maybe I'm wrong, but I don't think it's that difficult to know if you're exaggerating. If you're saying, if you genuinely believe it has a certain benefit and that you can act on it now, then say it. If it can't do the thing that you're saying right now, then don't say it, or say in some circumstances it can do this, or we are currently working on a development that will allow us to do this, or something like that. I don't think it's that hard to clarify. On the point about making sure that it's clear it's not a medicine and that it's something else, this to me sounds like there's maybe a broader branding problem possibly around what you do, and I don't think that's necessarily just the posts that you write on social media. It might be taking a step back and being like, okay, what imagery are we using? Does it look medical versus food? What kind of words and who are we following? What's our follow list look like? Because that a lot of time gives people an indication as to what kind of company you are. What other things are you retweeting? What other messages are you putting out there? Can you write blogs or posts that are not just about your product, but about the world in which the product exists? All this stuff helps give people context as to what you're doing. I mean, this is not the same, but, I'm a freelance writer, podcaster, random person. Nobody understands what I do. And so I have to spend a lot of time trying my best to put things out in the world that somehow make it clear. And sometimes I know that's by association. So if I, like Christine said, she retweeted my post on Clubhouse. So suddenly everyone realizes that I'm a slightly more skeptical tech person, right? That's helpful, and not a science and tech writer that just writes about the amazing
juggles
stuff.
Down anything that comes your way. Yeah,
exactly. So it's about how do you create context around what you're doing, and how do you use your platform that you have to put out messages that make sense alongside your product. And also, only talking about products, I mean, we all know that's not the best marketing solution as it is more about, we talk a lot about, as I say, the system, but also how do you build community? How do you talk to consumers? How do you, there's so much more around it as opposed to just saying we have a product and it does this.
Well, and I think in Javier's specific example, he has such an amazing founder story, a personal connection to, diabetes, and also to empowering farmers. He could be getting the crops he's using to create his xylitol for free, but he's not doing that. He wants to become a benefits corporation and is paying farmers for their
amazing.
these are all like, I mean, Javier, we're having
Amazing.
discussions about this, but these are all the kind of like reasons to believe in your vision and like what you're doing. And of course, xylitol has its benefits, etc. But like,
Yeah,
as
yeah.
your, you know, product really is solving a problem, and you're doing
And
it.
I mean, look at it this way. So there's a lot of kind of like advertising theory. When you work in an advertising company, you get taught a lot about like the history of advertising, and well, you don't always get taught it, but you normally are in a talk and someone will talk about the history of advertising.
Yeah.
And if you think about adverts that are in like, you know, the sort of middle of the 1900s and a wee bit, you know, up to the 80s, it was very benefit first. So like, this toothpaste will clean your teeth, or this car will make you cool. Right? It's very, very like benefit driven first, right? It was very like, here are the attributes of this product. It then shifted to like the emotional kind of, how does it make you feel? So it's where also the guys originally said the car will make you cool. Maybe it's the car gets you places fast and it gets you women or something. That's probably what they said in the day. Then it shifted to, it makes you feel empowered and free. I mean, look at car adverts now. They're all about freedom and exploration and blah, blah, blah. So benefit-led advertising works sometimes, but it's more about how you make people feel, what your vision is and whatnot. Then you obviously get back to making sure it's vision as opposed to reality, blah, 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 as we already spoke about. But there is more that can be said beyond just the benefits of
And I think like what's very like motivating from working with TFFers is like, we can have a whole separate like discussion about the whole VC model, but they're here to like make impact, right? That's their primary motivation. So their hype is like, how do we like actually can we change the world, right? Not just
also just briefly then, also, who is it that you're trying to reach with your messaging? This is a really key thing that I think sometimes is not thought about very deeply. It seems very obvious, but like, who is it you're trying to get at with these messages? Are you trying to get to customers that are going to buy it? Or are you trying to get to distributors? Or are you trying to get to investors? All those people are going to need slightly different messages. So, and it's also thinking, is focusing on tweeting the best thing? Or is it better to try and get into trade magazines? Or is it better to just try and get meetings with people and have a really nice website so that you can send them the website, they look at it and they get it? Sometimes it's just kind of taking a step back, and instead of just putting stuff out and hoping that people see it,
we're
just
having that
targeted.
exact conversation with our teams now, because it's like, social media is a bandwagon right now. You just feel like you have to be out there saying something about everything right now, but actually like think about that consciously. Like you said, like maybe the best mechanism to change the world and, do what you need to do is not on Twitter. It's on these other platforms, etc. And I just want to shout out to Marie, who said she was once told that you're responsible for what they hear when talking to the media. And I think that to the original question about exaggeration, it's like, to your point, it's like, when you're exaggerating and you're responsible for what people hear.
It's this difficult one. So I was on this panel at Slush in Helsinki last year. And
I really want to go there.
Yeah, Helsinki is amazing. I love Helsinki. I think it's because I'm Scottish and I'm like fine with the cold. I just love it. And
it's
people
like cold
are amazing.
and dark and
and the saunas, it's amazing. Anyway, but yeah, I was at Slush last year and I was on this panel and it was about the role of media and deep tech. And I was the only person on the panel who was a media representative, and I was moderating it. So I was a bit like, how are we going to get the views of the media here? But anyway, put that aside for 1 second. We were having this discussion about, how is it that deep tech gets misrepresented? And most people on the panel were kind of saying, oh, it's the media, they don't understand, and blah, 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 blah. And I was like, yes, there's a lot of journalists that regurgitate press releases and don't ask questions. And if you say something that's misleading and then they write it, whatever, you can say that it's their fault for not checking. True. However, I said this on the panel, I was like, we need to stop just blaming media. Like, what does it even mean to blame media? Media's got many different parts to it. And of course, I'm going to be a bit defensive because I'm a member of media. But the point I'm making is responsibility must sit with everyone. And, if you're speaking to a journalist who's not an which a lot of times journalists are not, that's not necessarily their job to be an absolute expert in what you're doing. Their job is to ask questions. And if you say, yeah, we can do this, and they go, can you really? And you go, yeah, we can. They go, oh, okay, well, and they should probably go and check it, but they might not. And so it is your responsibility to be honest and be humble and go, yes, it's true, but only in these instances, but that's why it's so amazing, and get that vision across. Honestly, journalists will prefer that. It's a more interesting story, frankly. Honestly, it is.
Yeah.
So it is responsibility of everyone, and absolutely media too. You know, I spend a lot of time thinking a lot about what I put out into the world, even just what I tweet, because I'm seen as a member of the media, so I'm seen as more trustworthy with my messaging or whatever. So I have to be really careful. Yeah, exactly. And not enough media people think about this. Granted.
Absolutely. Well, I think we're like rounding out the hour. So I just want to do one last shout out to the audience in case they have questions. But I just want to talk a little bit about Smoke and Mirrors itself. I mean, it's a fantastic work of art, I must say.
Thank
I highly
you.
recommend that anyone, yes, exactly, yes, goes and buys that book immediately. But I just wanted to like talk a little bit about like what it was like launching a book in a pandemic.
Yeah, it's been a journey. It's been a journey. Yeah, I mean, I'm going to do that. I'm going to hype myself for a second. If you've enjoyed anything I've said here today, it's honestly the best thing you can do to support or say thank you is to buy the book. It's only about £13 or whatever it is in your local currency. It's not currently available in the US or Canada. It comes out there next year, but everywhere else you can get it, wherever online.
And we're doing a book buy at TFF, so
there you go. Okay, I mean, you can get it through TFF. Exactly, but yeah, no, it's I keep getting told off for not actually trying to urge people to buy my book. Anyway, yeah, it's been interesting. Launching in lockdown. I mean, God, there's bigger problems happening in the world, not just with coronavirus, but obviously with everything with the with Black Lives Matter and everything that's associated with that. You know, my sort of story of launching my book is really the least of many people's problems, including my own. But I think it's been an interesting journey of writing a book about hype and then seeing the hype as a tool and then trying to use that tool to get people to buy your book.
Sell your book.
Yeah, exactly. But no, I mean, the book industry is interesting. I mean, it's you know, trying to cut through is really difficult. Trying to get your ideas out is really hard. And as there's, you know, as you can see from what's happening right now, getting books published can be a really difficult thing if you've not already got a huge platform or whatnot. So it was always going to be, you know, a big challenge to release a book. But in some ways, being able to do all these I've done so many online events and podcasts and whatnot, and I would not have been able to do this physically. I would only have been able to do stuff in the UK and maybe in Europe. I couldn't have afforded to go and do a big tour in the US before next year. And so I think in some ways it's allowed me to connect with readers in a way that I don't think I physically would have been able to do. And also from a very practical standpoint, I was quite ill at the start of this year, and I would have got more ill trying to sell this book physically. So, and you know, accessibility, I had so many people say to me they've tuned into things and they were like, you know, I'm in a wheelchair, it was really difficult to come to physical events, to be honest.
So there's a whole inclusive element.
Yeah, it's been really humbling, and the whole book industry has seen that. Like, so yeah, the only slight downside is I've not, you know, I haven't got to like see my book in a bookshop, and I was meant to go see it get printed at the factory, but that was right on the day of lockdown in the UK, so I wasn't allowed to do that, which was, you know, it's when you write, for anyone out there who's thinking of writing a book or has written a book, or, you know, Christine obviously in the middle of whatever, it's a hard thing to do, and you latch on to all these emotional, lovely moments that you'll get at the end as the reward. And so to not get them has been a little bit difficult, but you know, they'll come, and there's more books to write, and you know, I'm really, really, really proud of Smoke and Mirrors, and it's had a really good response so far, and people have got in touch and seem to really like it. So, you know, that's amazing. So.
Well, I mean, we're so grateful and thankful to count you into our community, and also to have you here tonight to share kind of, you know, your insights on hype. I think there's a lot of practical lessons for entrepreneurs to take on board. By the way, chapter 1 in your book is food and agriculture.
Is on food. Yeah, I should have said that. Buy the book just to have the food chapter. There you go.
I mean, absolutely. It's where it all begins. I think it's like, it is, in, you know, my humble opinion, the world's most important issue, but I really do think it is. It's the biggest lever that we can pull to solve all of our sustainable development goals. We need effective innovators and effective entrepreneurs, but I love your point. It's not just about tech saving the world. It's also about our individual actions, our activism, you know, our policies, and how we fit into the system. And I think for me, that's the biggest takeaway message. We're now actually working in our program, which is, we're running our virtual TFF Academy, which is our acceleration program for the challenge finalists. We're helping them now to like really pitch and position their companies to investors and on our global stage. I think there's a lot of great insights here about how to do that in a new way that the
I hope
world
so.
understands, right? So
we got to lead by example, you know, like,
yeah,
I agree. And, you know, you have to play the game, and I get it. I do get it. And, you know, that's kind of what I keep trying to say in the book. That it's diminishing to just be like, don't pitch, don't ask for VC money. It's like, well, I mean, you know, do you want this thing to be real or not? You know, so I do get it. But at the same time, I do think that there are small things that we can all do that aren't massive burdens on our time or on what it is that we do for a living, that can slowly but surely chip away to that long-term vision of critical thinking for all.
Totally. And I think there's like more to come. I'd love to have more conversations with you, but this was like a great intro. We really appreciate talking like smoke and mirrors and hype with you tonight.
Thank you.
Yeah, definitely to everyone who's tuned in. Thank you so much for your time. Do reach out on Twitter. Gemma is very active.
At Gemma Milne. Yeah, you can come see my Clubhouse takes.
And also, you know, via social media, we're happy to answer any follow-up questions. Thank you so much. Let's do a cheers.
Oh, cheers. Yes. Sorry.
Thursday night.
Cheers.
I started a glass of wine. Cheers.
Yeah. I mean, it's like 9 o'clock in the UK. So
exactly.
I feel it's deserved.
It's very deserved. Absolutely. Thanks so much for your time. Thanks to all of our
Thank you, everyone.
Have a great night. Okay.
Thanks, Christine.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.